Hey guys, Joe Simons, like Diamonds here with Salt Strong, talking about scientific saltwater fishing. These are the three breakthroughs, science-based breakthroughs that completely changed the game of inshore saltwater fishing. These three things I'm going to share on this video here, and I'm going to talk about who it's for and who it's not for in a second. I would have given anything, I've tons and tons of money to know this when my brother Luke and I were transitioning from bass anglers. As many of you know our story, we were bass anglers in Winter Haven, Florida, and we started getting into this inshore saltwater game, and we were lost, we were confused, we were frustrated, and we were ultimately really, really inconsistent. And I would have given anything to have what I'm going to share with you. So this is about 20 years approximately of studying, of finding pretty big discoveries in books. I'm going to talk about what we learned here in this $300 fishing book. Yes, $300 for this sucker, and it was well worth it. We'll talk about some things we learned from a couple of doctors in terms of what fish actually see underwater, and even talking about a system that we've really been using and essentially just kind of tweaking over the years to get it to its a place now where it is absolutely something you can replicate in your area, regardless if you're in Texas or in Florida or Virginia, the Carolinas, or any state in between. But first, let's talk about who this isn't a fit for, just to give you kind of a hall pass to leave if this is not a fit. It's anyone who is considered way advanced. If you're an advanced angler and you're catching fish on every single trip, and you're one of those that don't think you can learn anything else about fishing, I would go ahead and leave this because it is going to be a long video and this is probably not for you. On the other hand, if you are an inshore angler who is either new or newer, a beginner, if you will, or a weekend warrior who is maybe just inconsistent, maybe a little bit frustrated, maybe have spent a lot of money or time on fishing from equipment, boats, kayaks, etc., wading boots, it doesn't matter, and still don't feel like you're absolutely maximizing the investment that you've made, then this is a fit for you. And if you want to get this PDF, we have it. It's a, I don't even know how many pages it is now, but this is the kind of the final version. Actually, this is the pre-final version. This is the final draft before we're taking it final. But it's like 50 something pages and it's completely free. We want as many people to have this as possible. Our goal, just being completely transparent, is that you read it and you get a ton of value from it. And you're like, man, I want more from these guys. And you want to come join us in our Insider Club, where we have about 60,000 members right now as I'm recording this. So that is our goal. But this is completely free. It's helpful. It's everything I wish someone would have told me back when I was a weekend warrior, when I had limited time to go fishing and I didn't have a lot of time on the water. And that is a big myth that we're going to bust in this book, that time on the water is not the answer. Just like a golf pro will tell you, the answer to becoming good at golf is not just hacking away on a driving range. In many cases, you can actually get worse doing that if you don't have the mechanics and don't really know how to swing a club correctly or all your clubs correctly. So this is like having a coach take you by the hand and show you a system, a proven system based on science on how to find and catch our favorite inshore saltwater species. And I want to make sure it's very clear. This is not for like offshore fishing. This is not for bass fishing. This is really tailored for inshore saltwater anglers, people that want to catch redfish and speckled trout, snook, flounder, mangrove snapper, cobia, triple tail, etc. So let's talk about who we are. Why should you even listen to us? If you don't know about Salt Strong, kind of a little background. Luke and I have been doing this now for 9 years. We're about to celebrate our 10-year anniversary here at Salt Strong, if you can believe it. Pretty awesome. And I think the first thing that kind of took us viral was that third floor balcony catch. That was in downtown Tampa, cruise ships going by. And literally, my brother made probably one of the coolest casts I've ever witnessed in my life, where he went left-handed and made a 100-foot cast left-handed around a tree from a third floor balcony and ended up catching, and we landed that snook, which went viral. The FG knot, we didn't necessarily invent it. We saw it from someone else. We were the first people, I believe, that I've ever seen to put it on a YouTube video and do the step-by-step, so that FG knot has millions and millions of views. Also, Fishing in Our Soul, a really cool country song that we produced. And, fishing courses, that was something that hadn't really been done before, an online fishing course. And we proved, just like in golf and a lot of things now, that you can get better. You can even become somewhat of an expert and really, really shorten the learning curve doing things online. And of course, the Insider Club and things like Slam Shady and the Prawn and the Slot Machine, the Moonwalker, the Mulligan, the Alabama Leprechaun, Show Me the Gold, and Skinny Lipper, and of course our new one, the Polk County Tweaker. Just some of the top lures and equipment that we've come up with. And I'll kind of share why we're doing this, because I know that's a question you might be asking. All right, well, man, if they have all this cool information and they have a club, why are they willing to share this? Well, number one, our mission is to unite friends and family through fishing. We believe that if we can help you and then you help others, meaning you're able to share some of this knowledge and teach, maybe it's your kids, your neighbors, your grandkids, or whatever, that it's going to grow the sport of fishing. And more people fishing, the more it helps everyone. And once again, that is our mission statement. Number two, because we've been there. Those first handful of years were absolutely brutal. They were frustrating. We'd have an epic trip followed by like 3 completely skunk trips, and we could not figure it out. We were going to the same handful of spots over and over again. And, because we had full-time jobs, we could only go fishing on the weekends. And if we got there a little bit late, or if we had trouble catching bait on a weekend and we got to our 5 spots and they were all taken, we were like a lost kid at Disney. We didn't know what to do. And so maybe you could relate with this. We started going and buying those spot maps, right? Those hot spot, top spot, whatever they're called. And there's nothing wrong. I'm not knocking those. I think those are fine for a complete beginner, at least just to give you an idea of where to fish. But we had this kind of aha moment that fish have tails and no fences. And there's this thing called a tide system that's moving fish every single day, every single tide cycle. And certainly they're moving drastically sometimes during seasons and during mating, spawning season, etc. So fish have tails and fences. They're moving all the time. So no wonder those same 5 handful spots weren't productive every single time we went there. Yet so many of us did that. But this story about Luke, this is probably the one that hits home the most, and really what drove Luke to become essentially an expert at finding the fish, to the point he was able to enter tournaments and win money, etc. And so here's kind of the backstory. Some of the names have been changed to protect the innocent, but Luke worked for a big Fortune 500 company with over 10,000 employees, and his department about 150 or so team members. Everyone knew Luke as the guy who loved fishing. And many of his closest friends would probably say that Luke lived to fish. You see, every dollar that he was saving was going into fishing equipment. Maybe you can relate with that. And, he was the guy that would even leave the happy hour on Fridays to go home early so he can get his rigs ready. And he finally saved up enough to buy a kayak and then eventually a Carolina skiff. And there was rarely a weekend where Luke wasn't fishing, and his entire department knew it. And Monday mornings, maybe like, your company, it's kind of an all hands in-person department meeting. This is, pre-COVID, when people were working from home. And there was this one Monday morning meeting that Luke will never forget. And Luke had been out fishing that entire weekend. So imagine going fishing all weekend. I'm talking like 10 hours each day, like all day long weekend of fishing. And if you're wondering, do you marry guys, how he did it, he was single. That is the answer to being able to fish 10 hours every day, back-to-back days. But so he had a long story short, he had a horrible time. It was one of those weekends where just nothing was biting. He got a couple of catfish, a couple of ladyfish, but not a single fish that he was targeting. So brutal. So that would have been okay if, Luke had not been brought up in this meeting like I'm about to share with you. And even one bad weekend might have been okay if it weren't for Tom in accounting. That's stinking Tom in accounting. So Tom in his department was not a hardcore angler like Luke, and he only fished a handful of hours in that same general area that Luke was fishing that exact same weekend. And yet Luke walked into that apartment meeting that day to see a big group of people huddled around Tom in accounting. Curious to see what everyone was looking at, Luke walked over towards the crowd, and Luke couldn't believe it. They were all admiring the redfish and trout and snook picks that Tom had caught from the weekend. And one of the guys in the crowd saw Luke. He said, "Hey, Luke, you were fishing all weekend too. How'd it go?" So everyone's looking at Luke. Can you imagine this? Everyone's looking at Luke right now, 100 plus people. And Luke kind of stammered a bit. He wasn't going to lie to him, but there was no way he was going to look bad in front of everyone, or at least so he thought so. He's kind of like, stammers and not that much. It was more of an exploration trip for me this weekend, probably while looking down at his feet. And he could just tell everyone seemed kind of disappointed that he didn't have any good fish picks, especially since Tom had all these awesome picks. And I know Luke was just sitting there as he tells it. He's like, "Man, I was just praying this meeting would just start so the conversation would end." Yet, Angie in the marketing department, who was right there in that little group next to Tom, said loud enough for everyone in the area to hear. She's like, "Hey, Luke, sounds like you need to go fishing with Tom next time," a little bit sarcastically. "He could show you a few things. Look at all these pics." Luke was seething. And it wasn't an Angie so much, and it wasn't a Tom. They didn't do anything. Tom didn't do anything wrong. Caught fish. At the end of the day, Luke was mad at himself for investing so much time and all of his money, all his disposable income into fishing, only to feel like he was a failure. He felt shameful. Why? As I said, he had spent all of his money on fishing. He had dedicated uncountable hours on the water, only to have Angie and all of his coworkers laugh at him for being worse at fishing than the dude in accounting who barely ever fished and probably had really pasty white skin. And it was that experience, though, that fired Luke up to make sure it would never happen again. And that all ties in why we're sharing these secrets. We don't want you to feel like Luke did in that meeting. Moreover, I don't want you to have to waste all the time and money and energy that Luke and I did figuring this out through trial and error, all that time on the water. It doesn't have to be that way. There's just nothing worse than investing all of your time and all of your money into a hobby you love and still feel like you're not that good at it, at least not on a consistent basis. I mean, I tell you, I would have given anything for someone to give me these same tips that I'm going to share with you. And I'll kind of just scroll ahead. You can see here that's Luke in one of the tournaments. So Luke did figure it out, and that's what we're going to talk about in this this book here in this video. Luke did eventually figure it out and kind of crack the code. It took a long time. It was a lot of time on the water, which is what we're going to say for you today. And he got to the point he was entering in tournaments and was part of this Florida Flats Fish Association for a couple of years. And anyone who fished that tournament knew Luke because he was winning a lot and won first place many times and was even beating some full-time guides. So a lot of the things he discovered we're going to share here, and some of this is even newer things that we have discovered. So are you ready to dig in? And like I said, I will give you an out here if you don't want to watch this whole video. If you want to just get this PDF, I will put a link somewhere, depending on your watch this. There will be a link to go get this. It's completely free. You don't have to pay for anything. You don't have to do anything. We want as many people to read this as possible because we really do believe this will change the lives of so many people and get so many more people passionate and avid about fishing, which helps all of us. It's more people who are going to join our club, more people who buy our tackle, etc. So, scientific breakthrough number one, 90-10 feeding zones. And even if you've already heard about the 90-10 zone, please watch this because I'm going to go in depth in some stuff we've never really shared before. So let me start by saying, have you ever heard this? That time on the water is the only way to become a better angler. It's hogwash. And I'll explain more in just a second. At first, I have a confession to make. I am a bookworm. Yes, I love reading books. And some of you know this if you listen to our podcast. For many years, I read a book every single week, like over 300 books in a 5-year period of time. And I read everything from things on wealth and health and marriage and God and money and love, marketing, and of course, a lot of fishing books as well. And the reason I love books so much is they say a book contains about 10 years or more of an author's experience in a subject, and it's all boiled down to something that you could read in a week. In other words, by reading a book, you are tapping into years and sometimes decades of very specialized knowledge without all the painful trial, error, and time and money they went to learn it from themselves. It's basically the ultimate cheat code to advance in anything really, really fast, including fishing, which is why I hope you'll go get this ebook and why I hope you're watching this video. And out of all the books I read, there was one that opened my eyes and probably grew me as an angler more than any others. And it was this Scientific Angler. And I call it how a $300 fishing book changed my life. And it might sound crazy to buy a $300 fishing book, but what if I told you the book would shave off years of time and save you thousands of dollars in gas? Regardless if you own a boat or not, you still got to drive to all these different places. I mean, that's probably a pretty good deal, right? If it was going to shave off years of trial and error and save you thousands in gas, you'd probably pay $300. It's a pretty good investment if you ask me. And to me, that's not a bad deal when you look at it through that lens. So this Scientific Anglers, the book by Paul Johnson, it does go from, you can find it from $150 if you want a beat up copy, all the way to $900, depending on if it's autographed. I got lucky. If you can see my copy here, I actually have an autographed Paul Johnson book. It says Best of Fishing, Paul Johnson. So someone had bought this, put it out there for sale. I found it at a random bookstore, and I think I paid $80 or $90 for it. I didn't pay the $300, but now because of it's not in print anymore, and this thing is amazing, it does go up as high as $900, like on Amazon. Absolutely crazy. The good news is you don't have to go out and buy it. I'm going to literally share you like some of the biggest bullet points of stuff that absolutely changed everything for us. I think first and foremost, this is not the biggest aha, but first and foremost, he made it very clear. I'm talking about Paul in this book, that the only thing that matters is finding the fish, right? All too many anglers fall in love with reels and rods and lures and lure colors and other equipment, but none of it matters a lick if you can't find the fish. In fact, here in Saltwater, we have this internal ladder of importance that we live by. And if you're listening to this, I'll explain it. If you're watching, you can see it, but it starts at the top, meaning the top rung is the most important. And the very top is your fishing spot. That's the 90-10 zone. That's what matters more than anything else. None of this stuff below it matters as much if you can't be in a spot that have fish. Makes sense, right? Number two, this is one that gets overlooked, is positioning and approach. How you position, depending on your boat, kayak, or wading boots, and approach an area. It is critical. Because once again, if you had the best lure, the best bait, and you went up there the wrong way and jammed your boat into the oyster bed or the mangrove lines, of course you're not going to catch fish. That part is absolutely critical, and it gets overlooked. The cast. If you don't have a good cast, or the cast is way off or way over, you're obviously not going to be able to catch that fish, or you might even spook them. Then you got the right lure or the bait. And then is all your equipment. So the equipment, the stuff that most people want to talk about, your rod, reel, boat, kayak, for fishing, sonar, all this crazy stuff, that's actually at the absolute very bottom. And this ladder, this is something we did internally, but it's very similar to what Paul Johnson reveals in his book. And if anglers just refocus their time and energy on this ladder, starting at the top, their entire fishing game would change. Now, here's how Paul describes the 90-10 zone, which is the top rung of the ladder. And let me back up. If you don't know Paul, he was like the go-to expert at the time that many of the professional bass guys, this is like back in the Bill Dance days, that they were utilizing him to understand fish biology underneath the water. So Paul spent more time under the water. He's a big scuba diver with predatory fish like largemouth bass than probably anyone else alive at the time. And here's what Paul said in the book about what he saw underwater. He said, in any given body of water which I have dived, less than 10% of the underwater acreage has held 90% of the game fish population. All too often, the fisherman has absolutely no clue that he has cruised by some of the finest fishing areas he could ever imagine in his wildest dreams. That's right. Time and time again, Paul discovered that 90% of all the feeding fish were found in just 10% of any body of water at any given time. Hence the 90-10 zone. Now, that wasn't to say that a body of water couldn't have multiple 90-10 zone. It could, and it usually does. It really just means that if you dissect a body of water, regardless if it's a pond, a lake, a bay, or an ocean, that 90% of all the feeding fish are consistently found in just 10% of any area you are dissecting. You know what else that means? It means that 90% of all water is a dead zone. That, right? I mean, think about it, right? That was an aha moment for me. Not only that 90% that basically the bad area is moving and the good area is moving. And it's like chasing a needle in a haystack sometimes if you don't have a system in place to find it. And it's no wonder that newer anglers, and especially people who aren't on the water a lot, struggle to find the big schools of fish on a consistent basis. It can be like finding a needle in a haystack. And the more I read in Paul's book about this proven 90-10 phenomenon, I couldn't help think back on some of my past trips, but both good and bad. There were a handful of days where I felt like I could throw anything in the water. Maybe you've had some of those where it's epic, right? There was this one trip in particular, like we must have caught 25 to 27 redfish in this one little area. It was like every cast we were getting hooked up in redfish. We were like tired of reeling them in. We had found the glorious 90-10 zone. But the next trip, went to the same spot. It was a ghost town. There was not a single redfish to be found anywhere. What happened, you asked? Well, the 90-10 zone had moved along with the hungry fish. And after that bad trip, instead of us focusing on the 90-10 zone, we went and bought new tackle instead, thinking that was the problem. No, I am guessing maybe you've been there before. I know we did that multiple times. And around the same time as me picking up a copy of this really, really awesome book from Paul Johnson, my brother Luke and I had invested in our first drone really, really early on at Saltstrong. This is like the original DJI. And the aerial footage that we started capturing told the exact same story that Paul Johnson was seeing under the water. All the feeding fish were stacked up in just 10% of the water. It was absolutely nuts. So this is, if you're listening, I'm showing some pictures here. and they're actually in this ebook that you can get for free when you click the link down below. But figure number one here, this is some drone footage that we took showing the 90-10 zone in Port Charlotte, Florida. This is a big area. These are actually really, really big fish. And if you look at it, assuming that whole area is 100%, all of the fish are stacked up in that one little 10% area. There were no fish. And we went really far out, by the way, like meaning we took the drone all in this entire little bay, and we found 2 spots just like this in this whole area where all of the fish were. I have it zoomed in just so you can actually see the fish on there on an ebook. And no matter how many times we took the drone up, we captured a similar 90-10 story from the flats to the beaches. Check out, this is a flat here. This is actually in Texas. So we were over in Texas, took the drone up, and you can see these are actually little redfish. And there's nothing else in this entire area where I had these 2 red circles and those basically 6 little red arrows. Those are all the redfish in this entire area. This next one is a picture in Clearwater, Florida, of a beach. You can see these are all snook and some trout in there as well. They're all in 10% of this entire massive area. And we caught a lot of fish that day, but it wasn't until we saw these 2 big schools of fish all stacked in together. Now, the next big aha moment about these 90-10 zones, they all had one thing in common: structure. In fact, here's a quote my brother Luke has been saying for years: maximize the structure, maximize your results. Here's why. Redfish, sea trout, snook, flounder, they're all ambush predators. So they'll generally be holding close to structure for feeding and for personal protection. They're trying to get away from dolphins and sharks and other things that want to get at them. Now, knowing that these fish feed around structure, it's smart to locate areas where there are a lot of different forms of structure. Once again, maximize your structure, maximize your results, because that increases the odd of feeding activity in that particular area. If you don't know what structure is, here's a list of different types of structure that I like to look for. I mean, docks is an obvious one that's a type of structure. Oyster bars, huge. Rocks, seagrass, flats, potholes, any kind of depth change is an actual form of structure. Points like island points, that is a form of structure. Choke points is as well, where a lot of water is going through a small area. Trees, coves, even prop scars can be a form of structure. We obviously don't like to see those, but they are a form of structure. And the cool news is that all of these types of structure, even the ones underwater, can be found using online maps and online contour lines with just a few clicks, which leads me to my next big aha moment I had with all of this intel, that you could find all the best fishing spots from the comfort of your home. And note that we'll go way more in depth on how to find the best spots from home in the 3rd chapter, but just stick with me for a little bit here. I'm going to show you some other cool, really examples of what this 90-10 zone looks like from a satellite map, not from the drone, but from an actual satellite map. So you can see this is an area here, and I was in Marco Island. We were going to go fishing down there. Hadn't been there in years, and we were scouting out some areas just using normal satellite maps. You can see these points here. You can see that's deeper water. So anytime you see like that dark green around areas that have lighter green, you can tell that's deeper water. And deeper might only be 5 or 7 feet, but compared to 3, that is a massive, massive change proportionally. Going from 2 feet to 7 feet is a really, really big deal. Even 2 to 5 feet is a really, really big deal. And so that's deeper water there. It also looks like some grass, like these little patchy areas that looks like seagrass. And even some oysters. As we zoomed in, you can't really zoom in on this ebook. Or I guess you can zoom in on an ebook on your phone. But anyhow, we saw some oysters as well. So that's 4 different types of structure in this one area. So we have a thing called smart fishing spots. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But here's that same spot, so you can see it using smart fishing spots. We just turned on 2 of the 20 layers in smart fishing spots. And you can see, yes, there is grass in here. And yes, there are quite a few oysters around some of these points. And this ended up being a great spot. We actually caught some fish here. Now, this is one of my favorite tips, and it's how to find a 90-10 trout honey hole. We have spots that look just like this in multiple states and in multiple areas, especially in Florida where we live. This one happens to be a real spot that we fish like crazy in Port Charlotte. And this is where we go anytime we have kids, we have family in town who just wants to catch some quick fish. Even if there's a storm on the way, we know we can go to this spot and catch trout. I kid you not, we've caught maybe 1,000. I mean, it's certainly hundreds, maybe thousands of trout over the years in this spot. There are that many. And here's what it is. It's if you're not seeing it, I'll try to explain it verbally. But imagine you have a picture of an area, satellite view, and on one side is like a 5 to 6 feet depth. It's a little bit different. It's all one big flat, and then you have an area with a bunch of splotchy seagrass and potholes, and then you have a really shallow flat that leads up to either oyster bars or a shoreline or a mangrove line. This one happens to be a mangrove line with some oysters, and that's in 2 to 3 feet. And in that middle, that area with the patchy grass and the potholes, that is your trout zone. That is the 90-10 zone. And it's to the point we can have the big engine on and cruise right down this line where it's a little bit deeper, so you can still keep the big engine on, not be worried about getting prop scars or anything. And we will just troll a paddle tail lure and let the kids sit there, hold on to it. And of course, it feels like a massive shark's hitting it when you're trolling a couple miles an hour and a fish hits that paddle tail, even a small trout. It is so cool. And you can find 90-10 trout spots just like this from the comfort of your home. That's how we found many of them. And once again, I'll just kind of reiterate what we look for: splotchy grass with potholes around it, shallow water on one side, 2 to 3 feet, and slightly deeper water on the other side. If you can get a channel like within a half mile, like a deeper channel that has a lot of moving water, oxygenated water and bait, even better. As you can see, this is an absolute 90-10 zone. Up next, docks. If you're looking at this image, do you notice anything unique about those two docks towards the right top? If you look closely, you'll see some patches of grass. You'll see it looks like a little bit of structure. It looks different than just normal white sand, right? All of this looks a little bit different, and it is. Turns out that there's some patches of sand and some oysters in there. And this is a big area, a really big area. It has a lot of docks. I mean, you could spend the whole day just trying to explore this area to see where the fish were. And yet we found this online, and it turned out that like 90% of all the fish were caught right here around these couple of docks. It was an absolute 90-10 zone. And the first time we fished there, we were with a winner of a contest. He won a fishing trip with us, and we were a little bit anxious because the night before, pretty bad cold front came through. And we're like, oh man, I hope they're still there. But thankfully, our home research, once again, we never fished here. We showed up that morning. It was freezing. We had our jackets on. And because this little cove had some wind protection, all of those fish were literally piled up in there. And we ended up catching a slam there with our guest, and he had an epic time. So here's a couple more bonus dock tips on finding the 90-10 zone. Use 1-foot contour lines, and we have something that's proprietary to us, even half-foot contour lines. But you want to find the docks that have the most depth at the end of them, right? Docks are a form of structure. The more depth just gives you more opportunities for a lot of fish to be moving out, a lot more bait. And another one, when you're on the water, actually looking at these docks, look for older docks. If you see docks that have maybe some couple pieces that have been fallen over, lots of growth, right? A lot of barnacles and stuff. That is a absolute like fish those all day long. That means there's probably a lot of life underneath there. You can see here in this image, and this is a big area, right? These are really, really big docks and massive homes. And you can see the ones up at the top are only 13 feet deep. Then it goes to 16, then to 22 feet. They're all around the same length, meaning the docks are, but one's 13 and one is 22. I would be fishing over where the 22 foot depth is. And once again, all this intel can be found from the comfort of your home. A couple other little tips here on finding 90-10 zone. This is a really cool one in winter time. Remember we talked about that darker water? Look at that here. I would be targeting areas like this that have this dark water around a flat in the winter, especially ones like this, because this has wind protection. These are all pretty high mangroves. And a lot of times in the, especially the wintertime, you get that north wind that's pushing through here. That's going to give you some protection. In this area right in here is money. And I know it is because we've fished here many times. Of course, if you're an insider member, we show you exactly where all of our spots are where we're catching fish. But for this video, I'm not going to actually reveal exactly where this spot is. Another really, really cool one, hidden saltwater lakes. To me, one of the coolest things about not sticking with the same 3 to 5 spots, besides the fact it doesn't work, but the other cool part is the adventure, right? I mean, going back to your days as a kid, if you fish like a kid like we do you remember how excited you were to go try a new spot? It was fun, right? It was adventurous. And to me, finding these little hidden saltwater lakes, this is one, if you look really closely, these are all pretty tall trees. And so If you were over here fishing, you just assume it's docks. You'd never know this is here unless you basically own one of these, I don't know, 25 expensive houses. You would never know this was here, with the exception of nice satellite maps. But even over here, you never really see an opening, so you just assume you could never get back there. And in a boat, you never could get back in here. But my brother Luke happened to be over here exploring one day. He's like, "Holy smokes! There's one little gap. It's probably big enough for a paddleboard." And I think he ended up having to like get out and wade and like pull the paddleboard over. And he did. He found a little spot over here where he could publicly launch the paddleboard, paddled over, and got in here. And he caught tarpon, he caught snook, he caught redfish. Tried to get a grand slam in this little lake all by himself. And I think that's another really cool thing about these online maps and apps like Smart Fishing Spots. You can find so many cool things like this that normally would never be accessible or even available if you were just out scouting around. You never would have seen this in a million years. So how cool is that, right? So here's a summary of this first breakthrough. So we're almost done with the first breakthrough. And I'll go back to that ladder of importance. You know, if you did nothing else except focus on that top rung, that 90-10 zone, remembering that, man, 90% of the water is dead. I got to find the 10% where all the fish are. You'll be practically guaranteed to have the best fishing year of your life over the next 12 months if you just do that only. I hope you stick around for the next two because they're really powerful. But if you just did that, everything would get so much easier. And the reason why is, like, even though technology like fish finders and this forward-facing sonar and power poles and sealed reels and fancy lures that are all exciting to talk about, I love talking about it, I love buying them, trying stuff, they're all worthless at catching fish in dead zones. Let's face it, even if you have a $180,000 bay boat loaded to the absolute max with the nicest rods, reels, line lures, and live bait, you're not going to catch fish if you're in a spot without any fish. It's that simple. Real estate agents say it all the time. It's location, location, location. It's same in fishing also. The 90-10 zone is all about location, location, location. The other really exciting piece of news is that you can find the 90-10 zone from the comfort of your home. You'll be shocked at how many shortcuts and tools are available to show you these hidden spots, where to fish on certain days, certain times of days, etc. And we'll cover more of that in the third chapter. But first, in this next chapter, chapter 2, I'm going to reveal a science-based lure and scent. It's a discovery that could save you thousands of dollars. And then we'll follow it up with a discussion about a proven science-based system to help you find those pesky 90-10 zones crazy fast without leaving your house. See you in the next chapter. Scientific breakthrough number 2, the science behind this deadly white paddle tail. So have you ever heard of Dr. Kajiyama? He is no ordinary doc. He's actually a diehard fisherman who happens to be an eye doctor. And because of his background as a leading eye expert, combined with his love of fishing like we all have, he set out on a decade-long journey to discover what colors fish actually see underwater. And what he discovered was fascinating. And I can only imagine he did not expect what happened right before he went to publish his book. He actually got threats, like threats from lure companies and threats from tackle store owners and big box fishing retailers. They were all afraid of what Dr. Colin Kajiyama had discovered. So if you're wondering what happened, well, he was about to publish his book. It's called What Fish See: Understanding Optics and Color Shifts for Designing Lures and Flies. He was really fascinated with designing the best lure, essentially. And his book had numerous years of underwater research and tons of pictures showing everything that fish were seeing underwater. And if you look here in this picture, you can see how different our human eye is compared to a fish. You wonder why some of these lures catch the fisherman's eye more than the fish. They are very, very different in terms of our lens and our cornea. So before he actually went to publish this book, before it hit the printers, there was a little bit of buzz that he was doing this, and he actually received some serious threats from these companies and retailers. They did not want this information in the hands of the public. There was one tackle manufacturer, he put this in his book, that said, quote, "This information could make my inventory obsolete." Why? Well, because what he discovered in his book about lures and lure colors could potentially kill their tackle sales. You see, his new discoveries about what fish really see underwater went against everything that lure manufacturers and retailers and these sponsored fishing pros have led us to believe about color. In particular, we do not need 90% of the colors that take up a big chunk of the tackle store shelf space. Most of them are catching more fishermen than actual real fish. Like, for instance, did you know that only one color takes on the color of a water, just like a natural bait fish does? Yep. Dr. Kajiyama discovered that only one lure color can blend into the water and look natural, the same way a bait fish looks natural to a predator. And we'll share that exact color with you in a second. If you're wondering, all right, well, why is that so important? Well, because a natural looking lure, one that takes on the color of the water, will almost always, not 100% of the time, but almost always catch more fish than some unnatural and foreign looking lure. Plus, a lure that always takes on the color of the water is less susceptible to color shift. What is color shift? Well, Dr. Kajiyama describes color shift as happening when a non natural lure color literally changes colors as the fish approaches it. For instance, a red lure will look completely black to a redfish or a trout from far away. So imagine this: a redfish is coming in closer, and your red lure, it's in its path, and the redfish is about to come from the attack. Its eyes are zeroed on the lure, and then boom, all of a sudden it shifts from black to bright red, and then poof, that fish is gone, spooked. Just imagine a fish chasing down a bait fish only to see it change colors right before it attacks it. Talk about freaking out the fish. It would be like you getting ready to bite into a juicy hamburger and having it turn from brown to bright orange just inches from your mouth. No wonder so many fish kind of put on the brakes right before they're about to strike. You had the wrong lure color. So by now you've got to be wondering, all right, well, what is the only color that takes on the color of the water like a real bait fish? Well, according to Dr. Kajiyama's years of science-based studies, the only color that takes on the color of the water is white. Yes, it is scientifically proven that white is the only color that takes on the color of the water around it. No other lure color can do this. And that's really why experienced anglers from coast to coast, they always have some sort of white lure in their starting lineup at any given time. But there's something that can be added to a white lure to make it even more attractive to fish like redfish. A white lure with just the right amount of flash, just like a real bait fish flashes in the water, is really tough to beat. And according to the doctor, gold is one of the best colors to add for some flash. And that would probably explain why gold spoons work so well and have worked for decades and decades. Gold keeps its color well underwater, and it creates that flash similar to how a bait fish's small scales flash in the water. Silver also creates flash. It's what predator fish like redfish, snook, speckled trout, and flounder are naturally attracted to. So now you know why the Slam Shady paddle tail was a success. It was literally what the doctor ordered. It's a white lure with gold and silver flakes inside of it. It should be no surprise that this color has worked so well and has broken so many records. But first, you might be wondering, why a paddle tail lure? Well, for one, all predator fish eat it because it resembles a small bait fish, and that little tail puts out a small vibration underwater similar to a real bait fish. Two, it's super simple to rig, and it's more forgiving if it's not rigged 100% perfect. Three, anyone can retrieve it, even young kids. All you have to do is cast and reel. We have had so many stories of anglers who were held hostage to live bait and finally made the switch over to Slam Shady paddle tails and saw almost instant results. We've also got so many stories of young kids who were able to catch their first trout or redfish, snook, or flounder using that Slam Shady paddle tail, doing nothing but a straight retrieve. However, I want to be really careful here not to give too much credit to the lure. As I stated in the prior chapter, locating a 90-10 spot is the most critical. Not even the Slam Shady can create strikes in dead zones, and nothing calls in fish from miles away. That is not possible. But once you find that 90-10 zone, putting that first, then you can use a simple paddle tail and have an epic day. No more relying solely on live bait like we did for almost a decade. And I don't know about you, but given the choice between having to wake up an hour or two earlier and lugging around a heavy cast net and having to find the bait and having to make sure your live well works, which always seems to break down constantly, falling by all the weeds and the mess and the dead bait fish all on my boat, I would take a handful of soft plastic lures over that all day long. In fact, I'd argue that lures have a massive advantage over live bait in the following ways. One, you get more shots of the fish, right? A lure enables you to cover more ground, getting more opportunities at fish. More control for sure, right? No more being held hostage to finding and buying bait. You're in control of when and where you want to fish. And I'd say more freedom, right? It kind of goes without saying. If you can catch your fish on lunch break with a simple paddle tail lure, you have more freedom than the angler who only knows how to use live bait to catch fish. And as we talked about earlier, more adventure. I can't tell you how many times I've brought along a travel rod and a handful of jig heads and hooks and some of those paddle tails and caught fish on vacation from shore. That's almost impossible to do with live bait. And finally, fewer back problems. I know countless guides and some friends who have thrown their back out using a big 10-foot or 12-foot cast net for bait, especially as we're all aging. Shall I go on about how simple a white paddle tail has changed my fishing game? All right, let's talk about rigging. So here's a couple shortcuts. I think you only need to know two if you just want to keep it really, really, really simple. So rig number one, in basically 0 to 4 feet of water max. Basically just use this Haas Helix hook. And if you're looking at the picture, that is the Slam Shady 2.0 on a 3/0 1/8 ounce Haas Helix hook. So it's a weedless hook. You can see you can skin hook the top. And when it's done this way, it goes through anything. You can take this over oysters, through seagrass. This is probably the main setup I'm using like 80% of the time. In fact, we've won money in tournaments, which I'll talk about in a minute, using this simple rig. My kids have caught fish with this, and it can be straight retrieve or kind of double like pop, double twitch retrieve. And when the fish strikes, the hook pops out, basically the lure goes down, and it does all the work for you. It's that simple. Rig number two, basically 4 feet of water or deeper. Rig it like this. This one here is one of the Z-Man jig heads. I like the Haas round eye jig head, a 2/0 1/4 ounce. So a 2/0 1/4 is the way to go. It's the easiest. Like I said, we have all kinds of lures. There's Texas rig. There's all these different ways, but to keep it simple, if you just wanted one for 4 feet of water and less and 4 feet of water or more, these are the two that I would go with. Because this jig head here, a 1/4 ounce, it's deep enough to get down, and even 7 to 9 feet, like fishing docks or deeper water. It also looks awesome on the drop, a very natural looking drop when it goes down deeper in the water column. And we've caught some really big fish around docks and channels and even jetties using this simple setup. And it's also perfect. Like this is what you would use if you're doing the trolling for trout on the edge of flats, like the one I showed you earlier. This is exactly what you use. A 1/4 ounce, 2/0. That thing just goes right behind the boat, and trout will slam it. And I really do believe keeping it simple is the answer. If anyone who's fished with me, much of the time, this is all I have is a 2.0 and a couple jig heads and some different hooks. And personally, I'm forever grateful that I read Dr. Kajiyama's book. And speaking of doctors, let's talk about another doctor, the scent doctor. So this is the truth about lure scent. So the big question, is scent on lures really that important? Well, it depends. Here's what I mean. We've had days in the water, as I mentioned earlier, where we find that 90-10 zone and the fish are so fired up that basically anything we throw in their face, they're crushing. And on days like that, extra scent or any scent is a waste of time. Unfortunately, most days are not like this, as you probably know. And I vividly remember the truth bomb that Captain Mike Anderson, if you know him, he's a well-known guide in Tampa, and he's the host of the Real Animals fishing TV show. He said this on our podcast when I asked him how hard it was to put people on fish year-round. He goes, in a given 30-day period of time, there are 12 to 14 days that are going to be a hot bite. And there are another 12 to 14 that are going to be tough, sometimes really tough. And he's like, those are the days I have to work harder than ever. Even as a full-time guide, I got to work crazy hard to even get strikes. And he goes, I do everything in my arsenal to get the fish to bite. And he's like, the other 2 to 5 days, they're just a toss-up depending on the time of year. And I could not agree more with Mike. And it's on those 12 to 14, the struggle bus days, that I lather on so much scent to my lures that it would make a fish blush. The bad news is you usually don't know what kind of day it is until you get out there and fish for an hour or so. For that reason, I have found myself using scent 100% of the time. Why? One, I like to win. I like to catch fish. If you're anything like me, you want every possible advantage to catch the fish, right? And number two, like my time on the water is precious. I don't want to waste a single cast if I don't have to. And then also, I've seen with my own eyes how this scent, especially the one I'm going to talk about in a second, that it can actually fire fish up that were not biting. We had a really, really eye-opening experiment that we filmed on the dock. It's out there on YouTube. And three, because I believe in scent, because of the science that we'll talk about here. So have you ever heard of Dr. Gregory Bembenek? He is the guy behind Dr. Juice. And his research, the guy went all over the world, and he had like an aha moment in the tropical jungles of South America. He went everywhere from there to the bamboo forest, but he was down there and found out about these different pheromones And so he ended up doing kind of what was considered the first science-based or science-backed scent under the brand Dr. Juice. It was 30 years ago. The brand's still around today and doing really, really well. And there were even some bass records that were caught using his proprietary bass. And there's some fascinating videos out there of him. And even Roland Martin was one of the original big advocates of Dr. Juice, and even was winning some tournaments with Dr. Juice. And over time, this doctor perfected his scents for other species, including saltwater. This is the Dr. Juice Saltwater Slam that I've kind of been teasing here that I use. And if you're wondering, all right, well, what makes this so special and what's the science behind it? Well, it uses 3 different types of powerful fish-attracting science-based pheromones. And number 1 is the sex pheromones. And these pheromones are released during spawning, and they're known to elicit very aggressive territorial behavior in fish, even during non-spawning seasons. This gets them fired up. Number 2 are fear pheromones, and these pheromones are released by bait fish when they're being pursued by predators. So naturally, when bait fish are fleeing because of predators, there's fear pheromones going out. And the bait fish use this as a way to communicate to other bait fish that there are predators in the area. And as you can guess, predators are using this to key in on stressed prey, and it gets them fired up. And these pheromones are actually inside of this scent of the Dr. Juice Saltwater Slam. The third one is schooling pheromones, and these pheromones are released by bait fish to help them stay together during times of low light, like at nighttime or darker water. And so as bait fish get to the edge of the school, the concentration of schooling pheromones lowers, and this triggers fish to swim back in the area of higher concentration, which is the middle of the school. And of course, that helps predator fish key in on the big school. And all 3 of these pheromones can trigger aggressive behavior in even the most lethargic of saltwater game fish. And I'm telling you, this stuff flat out works, and it works better than anything I've tried. And when I combine that Slam Shady paddle tail and the prawn and other ones, the Slam Shady one, because it's so easy, with that Dr. Juice Saltwater Slam, that really has been one of the biggest secrets to my success, all while keeping it simple. And you might be wondering, all right, what about Procure? I've heard Procure is good. And I use Procure for many years. We even sell it on our store. Personally, though, I haven't touched Procure in years. As soon as I heard about Dr. Juice and the science behind it, I dropped Procure. And the biggest misconception about Procure is that it's good or better because you can see it on your lure, compared to Dr. Juice, which is more of an oil/water-based liquid. It's 100% marketing, guys. It's 100% marketing to fishermen who falsely believe just because you can see it that it's working better. So pasty kind of scents like Procure, they're all water-based. And that's why after 10 casts, you can see it, and then you can't. It starts disintegrating. It goes away, and eventually, pretty quickly, it disappears altogether. Once it's off the lure, it is gone. In a sentence, the water-based scents like a Procure wash off and are gone way faster than oil. Oil has a way to bond on the lure and can last, hours and hours and even days longer than something like Procure. So even though you can't see Dr. Juice on your lure, it is still working hours later. And if you don't believe me, get a little bit, buy some, and just put a little bit on your hands. Just rub it around and then wash your hands and tell me if you can smell it later. I bet you can, even maybe after washing your hands 2 or 3 times. And since fish can smell hundreds of times better than a human, even better than dogs, these fish are still getting impacted by the 3 pheromones in Dr. Juice way longer than any other scent on the market. So here's a summary of this deadly white paddle tail and the scents before we go on to number 3. In conclusion, you don't need live bait in order to catch endless amounts of saltwater fish. I wish someone had shared that with me years ago. In fact, I'd argue that lures are superior due to the flexibility, the freedom, the control, and the ability to cover water. We falsely believed for years that we had to catch or buy bait before we ever wet a line, and it cost us dearly. I would give anything to have that time back, especially those early mornings when the bait was, tough to find. And that's the best time of day. And I want to be clear, though, we're not against live bait. We still use live bait sometimes. If you have the time and a great live well and you love throwing a cast in or just love anchoring up and soaking bait or shrimp, it's great. It works. Of course it works. It's nothing against it. But personally, I love the freedom. I love the control to be able to cover ground. I want to be adventurous. I don't want to be tied down to a boat all the time with a live well. I want to be able to go catch a fish on lunch break or on vacation. In a sentence, learning how to catch fish with a lure makes you a complete angler. And moreover, I'd encourage you to keep it simple. You'd be shocked at how many fish you can catch when you become an expert or a specialist at just one lure like that Slam Shady paddle tail. Finally, use scent with lures, always. Fish have some of the most advanced smell receptors, way better than dogs, way better than humans. Take advantage of it. And I'd highly encourage you to try out some of that Dr. Juice saltwater slam scent. I have yet to find a science-based scent that works as well as this does for redfish, snook, trout, triple tail, flounder, and more. And you can get a bottle here. I'll put a link on there. And of course, it's over at fishstrong.com. And of course, get some Slam Shady lures as well, along with the Slam Shady mulligan, another great paddle tail, a little bit bigger, a little bit more vibration and casting ability. So I'll see you on the next breakthrough. Scientific breakthrough number 3, the science-based fishing system. I pulled up my boat ramp and I parked my truck. And I walked down to the ramp to wait on Luke. Luke was towing the boat and was meeting me at the ramp that day. And there was a salty old man with just leathered skin, was sitting down there in a blue beach chair just a few feet in front of me. He was holding a beat-up fishing rod that looked like it had been through a few wars. And his monoline just kind of limped out there about 20 yards before it disappeared into the water. From the look of it, it looked like he'd been there for a little while. So I kind of cleared my throat and I was like, hey, any luck? And he turned around to see me and he's like, nope. And I said, what are you targeting? He kind of scratched his head like he had never considered that question before. And he kind of paused for a second and he's like, anything that'll bite, I suppose. I felt that man's pain. I also knew immediately that he had little to no chance of catching a bunch of fish that day. He was fishing blind. Here's what I mean. In my bass fishing days, I was laser focused on catching one fish, a largemouth bass. And with the exception of like an occasional bowfin or a catfish, largemouth bass were all that I ever caught. I was dialed in on that one species. I knew the bass's biology. I knew the bass's spawning habits. I knew when the bass would be bedding, and I knew when they'd be out deeper offshore in some of the brush piles. I was fully absorbed in thinking like a bass. But when I made that transition from bass fishing to saltwater fishing, the rules changed, or at least I assume they did. I mean, with at least 10 different inshore species that would all eat a live shrimp, plus these crazy tides, and how can you even target a specific fish? It seemed impossible to me at the time. And for years, I wrongly assumed this to be true. Like that old man, I went fishing with that same anything that'll bite mentality, and the only thing biting was me struggling. And honestly, it wasn't until about 15 years later I discovered the secret that all tournament pros and guides will never go fishing without. It's a fishing system. You might be saying, all right, Joe, what's a fishing system? It's a predictable, repeatable, and a consistent formula for predicting the best spots, the best time and tide to fish those spots, and what lure or bait to use. Because when you boil it down, that's really all it is, right? If you know where you're supposed to be, and you know the best time to be there, and you have the right lure or bait, that is it. I know it's a little bit tougher than that sometimes, but that really is it. And I'm going to show you how we solve for that here in just a second. And it's kind of like having a strategic plan in business. Yes, sometimes you got to pivot a little bit, but you're of course not going to hit your goal if you don't have a plan. And it's capable of getting laser focused on specific species, and like the old man there at the dock. In a short sentence, a fishing system is a set of processes and it filters that pros use before every trip. It sounds pretty awesome, right? Well, it is. Let me explain how having a system helped us win money in a high-stakes fishing tournament against many experienced anglers and even a few guides. So Luke and I had started getting some recognition about our lures over live bait war cry here at Saltstrong. At the point we got called out, we got challenged, if you will. We had this tournament director, part of an exclusive Inshore Saltwater Slam invitational tournament. He called us up and he said, hey, are you guys brave enough to put your money where your mouth is? We got a 2-day tournament. It's been going on for years, and the only way to get in is by invitation. And the top 3 teams won thousands of dollars. So it was a pretty big pot there. And the tournament was won. It was a 2-day deal. And it was won by the 2 largest longest, I'm sorry, not like biggest. So not weight-wise, length. It was all length. So it was catch and release. 2 redfish and 2 trout after 2 full days of fishing. 2 redfish and 4 trout after a full 2 days of fishing. And it was an anything goes tournament, meaning 100% of the boats used live bait. In fact, no team in the tournament history had ever really used lures. I still remember the captain's meeting when they called out our name. We were getting heckled, and when they said team artificial only, Luke and I kind of started to wonder if maybe we had made a big mistake entering this tournament. But you know what? We had 3 advantages. One, It was really crummy weather for those 2 days. Lots of rain, lots of wind coming in and out. And it made it tougher than usual for these live bait guys to find and net their bait. And two, we were going to be able to cover more ground, a whole lot more ground, and get in front of more fish than all these other boats. Three, we had a system. And I'll kind of share what our system looked like on day one. So it was early summer, so that we knew right away that a big overslot snook, which is what we needed, it was going to be impossible to catch once the sun was up, or at least next to impossible. It makes it a whole lot tougher. So we used our tide system and our map system, and we picked 3 different spots where we do nothing but target snook. And note that these really big snook, they're big for a reason, and they're way easier to catch in the twilight hours or at night. And just like we didn't want to be like the guy who was catching anything in the bite, we were laser focused on catching snook. That meant we had a very specific snook lure. We had heavier tackle. We had much heavier leader compared to what we'd be doing later after we were going for reds and trout. So the first spot was an absolute bust. We saw some bait, but no signs of big snook. And we have a pretty hard and fast rule. This might save you a lot of time, that if we haven't caught a fish or at least had a strike in like 20 minutes, maybe in 15, we move. No questions asked. We move on to the next spot that we picked out. So we did. The second spot, though, it looked awesome. 2 oyster beds collided together on the edge of this like 2 to 3 foot 2 oyster beds collided together on the edge of this 2 to 3 foot in depth grass flat that had a 5 to 6 foot channel nearby. And there was like this long mangrove ram that wrapped around the back of the area. There was mullet jumping everywhere. This was like the perfect snook zone at the perfect tide, the perfect time of day, had multiple forms of structure. Plus it was loaded with bait, and it had that channel right through the mangroves. It gave snook easy access to the open bay. It looked epic. And within minutes, Luke was hooked up into an overslot snook. Minutes later, we had it in the net. We were so pumped. We were high-fiving. We were on the board with a legit snook. So then, time to move. We now downgraded our gear, right? We went lower leaders, and now it was time to get laser focused on the perfect redfish spot. And because we had a system and a plan based on that system, we knew that our first redfish spot was just right around the corner. So we pulled the trolling motor up, cranked up the big motor, and we hit that channel behind us. It was right over the other side until we got to that oyster cove that we had picked out the night before using our app. And this spot was a large, shallow cove. It had about 3 feet of depth or so. And it had like a perfectly circular, like mangrove island in the middle. And around this little small island was some oyster beds here and there. And like the prior spot, we could see mullet jump out of the water when we pulled up. Great sign. So cruising up slowly, once again, positioning is critical. We're trying to be as quiet as possible, using the trolling motor without adjusting it, right? A lot of people spook off fish by going really heavy or really low, but basically by changing the trolling motor speed quickly, really, really slow on changing the speed of that. We did spook 2 redfish, just getting up to the spot where we wanted to be, but we knew there were more ahead. 30 minutes later, we had landed 2 keeper redfish from the spot using that little weedless hook with a paddle tail lure like I described in the prior chapter. So we were now on the board with snook and redfish. Next up was trout. And once we would get 2 keeper trout on the board, then we just tried to upgrade the fish for that day. And so our trout spot was on the other side of the bay. So same deal, pulled up the trolling motor, got out of that area so we can get a little bit of depth, and we took off to the other side of the bay. Now, our trout spot was a large grass flat loaded with potholes that we had picked out on the satellite maps. And kind of like I showed you earlier with good trout spots, it had a really nice channel close by. And because the wind was blowing south, we positioned ourselves up at the top of the flat and let the wind drift us right along the edge of the flat. Anytime that you can drift instead of having to use your trolling motor, even better. Obviously, the quieter you can be, the better. And it was kind of like, imagine the channel being here, like essentially more depth, and then the edge of the flat, we were just letting it cruise right there on that line, right where the depth change was from the flat, a little bit of grass and potholes, to the depth. And that area produced a couple of nice trout, and we kept upgrading right there in that spot until we were pretty certain we'd have at least a chance of placing. And after the first day, we were in 4th place out of 30 boats. Not bad. Like, we were actually ecstatic. The next day, the wind and the rain had shifted, and thus did our plan. But because we had a system, we knew exactly where we should be fishing. And on day 2, we crushed it again. We caught a slam before many of their boats had even made it their first spot. Like, that morning was horrible for those guys catching bait. We were so grateful that nasty storm rolled in. And I can still remember standing there on that final day of the weigh-in. We knew we had done well, but we didn't know where we stood. My wife and my kids came. We were fishing in this with our dad, by the way, and our mom was there, and our brother Dan the man was there as well. And the announcer started with fifth place because anyone in fifth or lower was in the money. And when he called out that team's total length, like it's a total slam length, I knew ours, obviously. I knew we were in fourth place or better because I knew we had a lower score. Fourth place scored lower as well. So I was like, dude, we're in the top three. Up next, the third place, Team Artificial Lures. We did it. We ended up getting a nice 5-figure check. And I remember the other teams, like other people there, were just in shock. Like they were ticked off one, but they were also shocked. Like, I can't believe these guys came out of nowhere thinking that we were going to get made fun of because we weren't catching any fish and beat a lot of them. Like a lot of them still didn't believe that we used lures. Like, no way you guys caught all those fish with lure. Like, did we videotaped the whole thing? We ended up donating the money back to charity where all the funds went to. We left on a very high note. But the most important part, though, that tournament in particular, that gave us the confidence that we can not just go compete and catch great fish using lures, but we could do it against really good anglers who were using live bait with real money on the line. And if you're wondering, all right, what are the main lessons here besides me getting to brag that we won money in it? Well, the first is what we call the cardinal rule. The cardinal rule is know thy target fish. Notice how we had very precise spots and even precise times of day and tides for each species. And that was because we knew the biology, we knew the trends, and we knew the feeding habits of those 3 specific fish. And they're all slightly different. It was the exact opposite of the old man at the ramp hoping for anything that would bite. The more you know about the biology of a fish, science-based stuff, the more dialed in you could be on locating it. That's it. And the second big lesson here is having a system, right? And let me just share kind of repeatable steps we used in our system during that tournament. And it was in this very precise order. Now, if you ever join our club, you'll know that we have different sorts of steps depending on who you are. Meaning, if you're a beginner, yours is going to be a little bit different. If your goal is just to go catch a ton of fish like mangrove snapper, it's going to look a little bit different than this. But we do have a formula, basically a plan for everyone. They're all really, really simple, but that's what we need. It's a strategic plan on how to go out there and catch fish. I just want to say that up front before you think, oh, this is the plan for everyone, because it's not. But here's what we did. This was our system for that particular tournament. Number 1 is check the wind. Very first thing we do is check the wind, by the way, tide and temps. And most pros will tell you this is kind of a similar format or a similar system that they use. This is probably the biggest mistake a lot of beginners and weekend warriors miss. They almost do the wind and the tide and the temperatures last, or maybe even not at all. And why is it so important? It reveals so much about the type of spots. It's not going to reveal the spot to fish, but it's going to reveal the types of spots to fish. For example, as I said, this tournament was held in the summer, a hotter time of the year. And since we know that wind can help cool the top layer of water in hot months, right? A nice cool wind at nighttime and a nice ocean wind can cool that top layer of water in hot months. We immediately knew that we need to be fishing areas that have been getting some wind impact overnight. The opposite would be true in the dead of winter. In winter, that cold wind brings cold air to the top of the water, and that shallow water is the last place that cold-blooded fish like redfish, snook, and trout want to be in the morning. Instead, they're going to be found in wind-protected areas and might only push up to those shallow areas after the sun has been hitting that water and warming it back up again. Think like a fish. And with the tide, I'm looking for the best times of day that have current flow. Now, to find the current flow, you simply look at the tide chart and you find the steepest part of the tide line. Like when the slope on the graph is the steepest, the steeper the slope, the faster the current. And that doesn't always mean the best bite's happening when the current's the fastest, but it does mean that you want to be fishing when you've got some good water flow. Slow to no current usually means the bite shuts off. Moreover, with tides and temp, we know that in the summer, an incoming tide brings in cooler, oxygenated water from the ocean, into those warmer creeks and rivers and back bays and estuaries. This cooler, oxygenated water, it can fire the fish up. So knowing all of this, it helps us focus in on the types of spots that we want to fish. And once we use the wind and the temps and all this to zero in on specific types of areas, then we move on to step number 2. Step number 2 is we locate spots with the most structure. Remember, maximize the amount of structure, maximize your success. Now, this is where we cheat a little bit. The old school way is time on the water, right? Find structure by getting in a boat or kayak and surveying the land with your own eyes. Man, I still recall the days where we'd wait until dead low tide to go out and see where the oyster bars were and what potholes we could see with the water down. It's laughable. Who's got time for that these days? The first big innovation in finding structure was the introduction of online satellite maps. That was big, right? Google, Bing, MapQuest, they all released their own version of satellite maps where anglers like us could finally study bodies of water from the comfort of our home. It changed a lot. And the ability to zoom into an area and potentially see oysters and depth changes and other hidden structure from a computer, it was amazing most of the time. And a lot of it depended on the quality of the satellite picture, the clouds, even the clouds were on the picture the day it was taken, how long ago the picture was taken, and of course, water clarity. And even if all three lined up and were perfect, it was still more than to be desired. And you still kind of had to go out in the water to verify what you assumed you were looking at on a lot of those older maps. Well, over the past year, a brand new technology has emerged that has supercharged all of this to a whole new level. It's like giving the very best satellite maps steroids, plus some like cool underwater cameras. And I'm talking about smart fishing spots. It's an amazing tool. And with one click of a button, one click, you can see every single oyster bar in an area. No more having to zoom in and squint and ask your friend, hey, do you think this is an oyster bar or just a patch of underwater grass? And speaking of grass, in one click of a button, the smart fishing tool shows you every patch of seagrass. And in one click of a button, it shows you every single 1 foot depth change. I mean, how crazy is that? Even in many areas, every half foot in depth change, which I've never seen anywhere else. In one click of a button, Smart Spots reveals a 4K satellite layer. It reveals things the old school satellite maps never could in a million years. It's kind of like seeing the picture on an HD TV for the first time, a high def TV, after spending your whole life watching non-HD footage on an old school tube TV. When you're 40 years or older, you probably know what I'm talking about. And also in one click of a button, this proprietary app reveals a 3D underwater sonar view that's like looking underneath the water surface. It reveals every pothole, every depth change, every ledge. We've even found sunken pieces of structure on the bottom. And let me just show you what I mean. So it's one thing to talk about it. Let me just show you. And so every one of these areas here, assuming you're watching this is all the exact same spot. This is a massive area. Like this would take you all day, like 10 hours to just explore this whole area. Just to give you an idea, this is not a closely zoomed in area. So the first picture is just today's satellite map. That's what this area looks like on normal Google. And it looks familiar, right? It's not bad. You could zoom in, it looks, and probably see some things, but it's okay. The next one, this is with the oysters. So you can kind of get an idea of what it looks like. When I hit one button, I now have, in seconds, every single oyster bar in that entire area. Pretty cool. So all those little gray clusters mean oysters. Next, seagrass. So every one of these green patches is seagrass. Next, once again, same spot, right? 1 foot contour lines, and even half foot if you zoom in. The more you zoom in, it gets down to really granular. But I can now see every single depth change in this entire area. So you can see over here, there's mostly 2s and 3s, and all of a sudden you see 5s over here around this one little piece of structure. I'd probably be fishing over here. This is that 3D underwater sonar. This is not that impressive, honestly, because this spot doesn't have a ton of stuff to see underwater, and you really need to zoom in to see it. But you at least kind of get an idea of what it looks like. And this next one is the same spot with the 4K satellite, and it gets really good when you zoom in on this. So this one, though, is all of those layers turned on. So 4K, oyster, seagrass, and our exclusive smart spots. So now it's actually showing you which spots for that given day and tide should be the hottest to fish. How cool is that? I mean, it's an absolute game changer. So let me show you this is Google. This, once again, same spot. This is everything turned on. This is just Google. I mean, talk about a night and day difference. If you handed someone the bottom image, which is the same as the top, except all these layers turned, it's only 5 of like the 20 layers of smart fishing spots turned on, but talk about a game changer in terms of showing you where all the structure is, where you should be fishing, etc. So it goes without saying, we always use smart fishing spots for step number 2. In mere minutes, these exclusive map layers reveal every piece of structure and every potential 90-10 zone in the area. Just a few clicks of a button, and we have every hot spot in our crosshairs, eliminating hours of guesswork every trip. And what used to take days or even weeks to discover stuff like this, you now can get in minutes, all from your home. So it goes without saying, this kind of intel gives us a massive advantage in pre-trip planning over those that don't have it, like most of the anglers in that tournament we fished in. Yeah. So you might be wondering, all right, is this considered cheating? No, it's simply taking advantage of technology to save time. It's no different than when the first fish finder came out. Yeah, I don't know if you remember it, but when the first fish finder came out and then the next generation, people were in uproar. I mean, there's people saying this is the end of fishing forever. It's cheating. We're going to kill every fish in the ocean. They were clearly wrong. It's no different than the technology that gives us 300 horsepower engines compared to 60 years ago when 25 horsepower was the highest you could ever find. It was all that was there. Technology saves us time and makes our lives easier. And if that makes you uncomfortable, then I would probably urge you to never use smart fishing spots because it is a time saving technology machine. And more on that in a second. Let's move on to step number 3 of this system. Getting back into this system here is picking your spots. So now, armed with knowing what types of areas the fish will be holding based on the wind direction, speed of wind, and temps, plus knowing where all the structure is in those areas, which we just talked about, now we pick our spots. And my recommendation is to pick a minimum of 5 different spots, sometimes even 7, but 5 is a good number. And even though in the tournament we purposely fish very specific spots for certain species, the truth is you can catch a full inshore slam in a single spot. Heck, in that very first snook spot that I mentioned, we also caught a trout and we saw a little juvenile redfish dart off. So all 3 species were in that one spot. And considering that most of us, are not competing in high stakes tournaments and we just want tight lines, right? But I assume if you're listening to this or watching this, you just want to get tight lines every trip. The goal is to pick the 5 to 7 spots that look the fishiest, aka that have the most types of structure and fit the mold for the type of spot that you want to be fishing based on the wind, tides, and temp. And when done correctly, you can target and catch multiple species all in that same general 90-10 zone. And I do recommend the 5 to 7 because you never know if someone's already going to be in your spot, and you never know with 100% accuracy. It's just impossible if fish are going to be where they're supposed to be. That does happen sometimes, let's be honest. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a really, really important one. We have a hard and fast rule that if we have had 0 strikes in the first, and I'm saying 20 minutes is max, many times it's 15, you just kind of know, you leave and try the next spot. It kills me when I hear someone says, we fished the spot for 2 hours and didn't catch anything. Like, man, you could have fished 5 spots. And one of them probably would have been in the massive 90-10 zone. Don't ever stick around that long. Now, number 4, this might be new to you, but this is critical. I've interviewed a bunch of different redfish pros on the Salt Strong podcast over the years. And besides having a system in place, the other thing they all agreed upon was the power of a network. Full-time guides all rely on their network. We all know that. Tournament pros all rely on their network. I remember Captain C. Richardson, we were fishing with him one time, and he's like, man, you're only as good a fisherman as your network. And I agree. Sad part is most of us don't have access to a network of anglers that we can trust or have a lot of information. I know I sure did when I was first getting started. Luke, we're basically 100% on our own. But the internet has changed all that. And I'm not talking about a Facebook group. Fishing Facebook groups are like the Petri dishes of obnoxious, rude, and inappropriate comments from keyboard warriors. We should know. I think we own the largest saltwater fishing Facebook group in America, and I rarely spend time in there. Instead, I rely on our private insider community. That is my network. That's where I go to see local trends. That's where I go to connect with other anglers in the area I'm fishing. We even have full-time guides who are sharing their private fishing reports every week in there. It's truly amazing how the entire conversation and attitude, a positive attitude, changes once you're behind a little bit of a paywall. It's crazy. There's no cursing. There's no belittling. There's no politics. There's no negativity. The only thing allowed is positive anglers helping anglers. And I've never seen a network like it in all of my years. So how do I use it with this system, you might be wondering? Well, it's pretty simple. Once I've done my homework and picked out the spots and I kind of know the trends, then I head over to the community and click the region I'll be fishing. Like if we were going down to Marco, I'm going to click that Marco Naples area, and I start reading some of the latest fishing reports for that week. And what I'm looking for is anything that would confirm or disprove the spots I've already picked. And I'm also looking for other insights on the type of structure or depth that other anglers are having luck with in that area. So, for example, if I had picked out a bunch of spots in the 2 to 3 foot range and I'm seeing reports of fish being caught in 4 to 5 feet of water, I might start fishing that same area in slightly deeper water, right, to start off. Little tips like that can mean the difference between fishing in a 90-10 zone and passing over one. Don't skip this step. It's critical. The network part is critical to your success. And if you join us in our Insular Club, you can even, your kind of steps might look different. The network and some of this, like a smart fishing game plan, which is where we reveal the local trends, that is something you could do first. So you don't have to do it last depending on how advanced you are as an angler. And if you're not an insider member yet, you need to join us today to see why 60,000 others are part of this tight-knit and super helpful network. I'll put a link on here to join. Don't go to the normal pricing, and we'll give you a special one just for people that have made it this far in this ebook. And then finally, the last piece of it is kind of rank and organize your spots, right? Kind of finalize your game plan. And this last step, pretty straightforward. When you hit the water, you should know with 100% certainty which spot you're hitting first, exactly what lure or bait you're going to use, and what species you're most likely going to catch. Will it always work out perfectly? No. Will it take some time to nail it down where it's kind of second nature? Of course. No one is just born a consistent angler. It takes time. It takes putting in some reps, but it always goes 10,000 times faster when you have a system in place, especially if you have access to a helpful network. And before you know it, you'll have a repeatable system that you can use anywhere all year long, regardless if you're in a boat, a kayak, or fishing from shore. Now, there's one last piece of this system, and it's what to look for when you actually get on the water. And we call it the ABC trifecta. This is our on the water system. Because let's face it, no matter how good all these map filters are in smart fishing spots, that things will always look a little bit different when you're actually on the water. So the A and the C in this ABC trifecta, they kind of tie in with the 5 steps above, but we use them as repeaters in this trifecta because what we've seen over and over again, especially with newer anglers, is they get completely overwhelmed once they're out on the water. And so this simple formula brings all the important things to light and just creates a little clarity and focus. So here's what each letter means. A stands for ambush. This simply means that there must be structure in order to give predator fish a place to ambush their prey. Fish, bait fish, crustaceans, etc. Assuming you used the formula above and picked out the areas with structure, oysters, grass, ledges, docks, then you should be good to go here. The one exception is if you're fishing like after a major storm like a hurricane and some of the structure has moved or shifted compared to the maps. But either way, if you're on the water in the spot and you're not seeing some sort of ambush spots, even points, then move. Speaking of moving, let's move on to the next one. B stands for bait and birds. I have caught fish in areas without bait or birds, but it is rare. A predator's number one goal every single day is to eat. Thus, they go out of their way to put themselves in spots that have food. Can you guess what also loves to gorge on this same food? Birds. Birds love it. This holds true from Texas to Florida, New Jersey, every state in between. If you find the birds and find the bait, you've probably found some predator fish nearby as well. So when you get to your spots, always be looking for signs of bait. It could be glass minnows making those little dimples on the water, to mullet that are jumping, to mullet that are moving, to large schools of bait that are actually making waves. And with birds, look for anything from pelicans diving to white egrets feeding in the shallows. Personally, if I see more than one white egret feeding around oyster bars or shorelines, I almost always stop and fish that area, even if it's not one of the spots I pick. White egrets are like a beacon for like redfish being in the area, from my experience. And especially if they're feeding around the oyster bars or the shorelines with a little bit of structure, man, no brainer. C stands for current. Current or current flow is critical to your success. And even though tide charts are mostly accurate, the information you get is from a tide station that could be miles from the actual spot you're fishing. So that means the flow where you are could be ahead or behind, sometimes even hours. So it's always important to make sure you're fishing areas with current. No water current, no bite. Predator fish use current to bring food to them, kind of like a conveyor belt. It's why fishing a creek mouth or like a choke point at the beginning of that outgoing tide is so good. Those predator fish are just sitting there waiting to ambush all that bait that's getting flushed out by the current. So use current to your advantage. Think like a fish. And note there are a few exceptions to this rule, like some of the big lagoons in Florida. But even then, you go to areas where there's some sort of water movement. It could be, the spillways. It could be a little bit of small of an access point. It could even be wind, but something that's giving some movement to that water. Now, putting it all together, the good news is that having a fishing system isn't complicated. As you've seen, it's just 5 or so steps and a handful of variables that you must know. On the other hand, it can be time consuming to find all of that data you need, not to mention crazy expensive to buy all the map layers that you need to succeed. And what I found is there's really only 3 ways to get your hands on a proven, repeatable, and reliable saltwater fishing system. And number 1 is to spend countless days on the water for about a decade or so, and you'll finally crack the code through trial and error by yourself. I don't recommend that one. Number 2 is hire a guide for at least 100 times and try to absorb everything you can about his or her system, because they all have a system, which can get pretty expensive and time consuming. Number 3 is invest in a done for you inexpensive system. And if you like to get your hands on a done for you system and see exactly how we know where to find that 90-10 trip every trip super fast, then keep on reading. In conclusion, fish aren't as smart as we give them credit for. Like humans, they are very predictable when you study their biology, their wants and their needs, and their feeding habits. Just like if you sat in the parking lot of a McDonald's and watched the exact same guy pull up to the drive-thru to pick up breakfast every single day for 7 days straight at the same time, you could probably bet you'd find him there again the next day around that same time. Now, if you finish this book and only remember one thing, let it be this: 90% of all feeding fish can be found in just 10% of any area for any given day, tide, and time of day. Everything else becomes easier when you are laser focused on finding that 90-10 zone first and foremost. You'll never waste time casting into a dead zone, and you'll also never be held hostage to that same handful of spots that you normally fish, the same stuff that we did over and over again the wrong way. And when you start simplifying your tackle using fewer lures, not more, you'll also see your strikes per cast go up. Same with scent. Use it and use it often. Finally, if your goal is to get tight lines on every trip, which it should be, promise that you'll never go fishing with the "I'll catch anything that'll bite" attitude. Instead, come prepared with a strategic plan, a strategy. It will make fishing so much more enjoyable. You'll save time, you'll save money, and most importantly, you'll have the ability to teach the next generation how to fish like a true pro. Now, if you're feeling 100% confident that you can master it on yourself, then go out and crush it. Awesome. I love that. On the other hand, if you're like most people who prefer shortcuts, prefer a proven system, and want to surround yourself with awesome people, then we'd love to have you join us in our private insider club. Not only will you get unlimited access to smart fishing spots, but we also have an online fishing school that takes everything I've shared with you today to the next level. And you can see it working on the water with some real life examples, and you get our entire smart fishing system. Don't wait. Don't put this off. The best time to become a consistent angler was yesterday. The second best time is today. So here's your private invitation. The Salt Strong Insider Club was founded over 8 years ago as of this writing, and it really had 3 main goals. Is one, to help anglers like you save time, catching more fish per trip. Number 2 is to save money. And number 2, to help anglers meet other awesome people, because our mission here at Salt Strong is to unite friends and family around fishing. And over years, the club has grown from just a couple thousand members to over 60,000 members. And the technology, you can probably see here on this one video, has grown as well. What used to be all kind of video-based tutorials is now evolved into an app, live events every single month, live coaching, and much, much more. And our members also receive 20% off or more on all of their tackle. Not only that, we personally go out and test new tackle and report back on the value. So it's kind of like having access to your own saltwater fishing consumer reports. And Smart Fishing Spots, both the app and the desktop, has turned into the #1 done-for-you system to finding the 90-10 zone in the country. And then once you start logging all your catches, the system builds you a private and personalized catch log. It's like having your own private journal inside of the app. It's awesome. And you can also add in unlimited waypoints, so you'll always have everything right there in your hand in a couple of clicks. So I'll put a link here to join. I look forward to seeing you inside the private community. I hope to meet you face-to-face in one of our chapter events. Guys, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I know this is a long video. Hopefully it was really helpful. I wish you tight lines. I thank you so much for everything, and I hope you learned something of value. And as I said, I really hope to meet you in the future. Click down below if you want to join us in the club, and I hope to see you inside.